Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. It was a rare and very public condemnation from NATO. The alliance, which is marking its 75th anniversary at a summit in Washington, directly condemned China. A NATO statement accused Beijing of enabling Europe's largest war in recent history. Russia's ongoing assault on Ukraine dominated the summit's main focus as the bloc introduced a military aid package for Kiev. Ukraine's possible NATO accession was also signaled. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also attended the summit, where he met with several NATO leaders, including Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Türkiye and Greece have seen relations drastically improve over the past year, with Wednesday's meeting between Erdogan and Mitsotakis being their second in 2 months. And President Erdogan reiterated his call for the bloc to help bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. He said attempts at cooperation with Israel within NATO will not be approved by Turkey. But much of the summit was focused on Ukraine, where NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said the bloc is preparing for Kiev to join the alliance. U.S. President Joe Biden also announced a $43 billion aid package for the country.
Today, I'm announcing the historic donation of air defense equipment for Ukraine. The United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, and Italy will provide Ukraine with the equipment for 5 additional strategic air defense systems. And in the coming months, the United States and our partners intend to provide Ukraine with dozens of additional tactical air defense systems. The United States will make sure that when we export critical air defense interceptors, Ukraine goes to the front of the line.
And for more on the NATO summit, joining me now from Istanbul is Sean Michael Cox. He is a senior advisor at the Global Policy Institute, and from Syracuse, Italy, Matthew Bryza. He's a former U.S. ambassador. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Sean, what do you make of this year's summit, and what were the main highlights?
The summit this year was very interesting. First, it was to celebrate, of course, the 75th anniversary of the foundation of NATO, and it was intended to display for the world that NATO is still strong, it's still vibrant, it's still a relevant organization. But given what's been happening in domestic politics in the United States over the last month or so, it turned something into an examination of the Biden administration. While on the face of it, all 32 member states were there to show their unity. I think a good part of it was to evaluate what is happening with President Biden and the Biden administration. What are the chances of having former President Trump again leading the United States, and what would that mean for NATO? Some of the highlights, of course, were focusing on a unified front in supporting Ukraine, in castigating Russia and China, and just sort of reasserting what NATO's mission is in the 21st century.
So NATO leaders renewed their support for Ukraine and said that the previously promised fighter jets will be flying over the country this summer. So are tensions likely to escalate between Russia and the Western-led alliance after these fighters arrive?
So it depends on your perspective. My view is that Russia has been pushing as far as it can into and against Ukraine, and sometimes threatening the NATO alliance. Putin behaves as a stereotypical geopolitical bully, and the more the target of his bullying resists, the more likely it is he will back down. And so over the course of the last several months, Russia has been devastating civilian infrastructure and human beings using glide bombs, so bombs that are dropped from aircraft that glide then to their target in Ukraine. And with the F-16s coming, hopefully, as was announced by the end of summer from the Netherlands and Denmark, NATO should theoretically be able to force those Russian aircraft further away from Ukraine and make it less likely they'll be able to rely on those glide bombs that you're showing the clip now of the devastating impact of them. So I think we'll actually see pressure on, yes, of course, pressure on Russia and Putin increasing, but I think that will lead over time, could lead, I should say, to a decrease in tension.
So, Sean, President Erdogan has warned against a potential NATO-Russia confrontation, saying any steps that could lead to this must be avoided. So the question is, how could this stepped-up support for Ukraine from NATO impact Turkey's relations with Russia as well as its neutral position between the two warring sides moving forward?
Well, obviously, Turkey has a vested interest in keeping any of the conflict away from its own borders, from keeping things calm in the Black Sea region. Turkey is one of the few European countries that still maintains a trade relationship with Russia, and they're in a very delicate balancing act. President Erdogan likes to have these opportunities to be seen as a deal maker and as a peace builder, and it's a very appropriate role for him given the position of Turkey, both geographically and in terms of the history under Erdogan's administration in being able to broker agreements or at least mitigate conflicts between different sides. It's a very important role that Turkey can play. And I think it means that in the short term, that Turkey will have a stronger voice in terms of trying to mediate any potential escalation of conflict between Ukraine and Russia and what the Western support for Ukraine, the additional Western support for Ukraine would mean.
So Erdogan also, Matthew, expressed Turkey's expectation from its allies to adopt an effective counter-terrorism approach to address Ankara's concerns. So moving forward, do you expect any substantial support from the allied countries when it comes to Turkey's fight against terrorism, especially on its borders?
I sure hope so, but I don't expect that will flow out of the NATO summit, which was so overwhelmingly focused on Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And President Erdogan understandably complained that Gaza was not mentioned really at all at the summit. And so did Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain. So if while this horrific assault on civilians in Gaza is taking place after the atrocities committed by Hamas is not mentioned, I think it's a stretch to imagine this NATO summit leading to more help for Turkey in fighting terrorism. But I think it's appalling that the United States continues to partner with the YPG, which is the PKK, having, in fact, consciously made a decision to try to trick the world and claim that the PKK's forces in Syria, the YPG, are somehow the Syrian democratic forces. So I think this is going to be a painful wound in Turkey's relations, especially with the United States, for some time to come, unfortunately.
So Sean, Erdogan, together with actually Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez, also called on allies to adopt a principled approach against Israel's atrocities in Gaza. And Erdogan said Turkey will not approve attempts to cooperate with Israel within NATO until a sustainable peace is established. What do you make of this?
I don't think that's surprising in any way. President Erdogan has been very vocal in his support for the Palestinians and the victims of Israeli aggression, again in response to the initial Hamas attack. But President Erdogan has a position to maintain not just within NATO, but also within the Eastern Mediterranean, and also even within the Islamic world as well. It's completely unsurprising that he would not approve of or support any NATO actions that would help Israel out in its fight against Hamas and the victimization of the Palestinians in Gaza.
So, Matthew, I mean, is peace still a possibility given the U.S.'s unconditional support to Israel?
I think that depends on the political future of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He views continuation of this horrendous war, apparently, as critical to his own survival, both politically, to be the prime minister, and also, I think, to avoid prosecution for all those allegations of corruption. So as long as he is there in power, I think we're going to see the war continuing. He's said as much, right? He says the war will continue regardless of ceasefires until Israel has met all of its goals, and the primary one being the complete destruction of Hamas, which it's hard to imagine what that means, since so much of Hamas, as the cliche goes, is an idea and is ideology. But Israel's a democracy, and eventually there will be elections, and of course his time will pass. But boy, that's not a short-term time frame, and I'm worried this struggle is going to go on for a while.
So, Sean, Turkish president also met his Greek counterpart Mitsotakis on the sidelines of the summit in Washington, D.C., where they pledged to turn the Aegean into a sea of peace and cooperation. So, can both countries maintain this positive agenda on issues which they have conflicting interests?
I think in the short term, they definitely can. We see the history of Turkish and Greek relations going back to ebbs and flows of positive relations, of negative relations. Currently, both countries are experiencing similar issues with climate change, similar issues with migration, similar issues with economic strain as well. So there's a lot of positive places, there's a lot of positive areas where the two countries can meet and they can help and they can support each other. Again, this is for the short term. What would happen in the longer term when political partners or political figures might change in either of these countries, or if some event comes up to derail these positive actions, is unknown at this time. But definitely for the short term, I see that some real progress could be made on the issues that impact both of these countries in the Aegean.
So, Matthew, there was another sign of rising tensions between the East and West after NATO accused China of supplying Russia with weapons components to attack Ukraine. Is this a major shift for the alliance?
It is. I mean, it's the first time NATO has ever spoken like that about China together as an alliance. And it elicited a very sharp response from the foreign ministry of China, basically saying that these are unfair accusations. And the Chinese foreign ministry said, NATO, you're a defensive alliance focused on the North Atlantic, as the name suggests. Stay there. Don't come into the Far East, into the Asian theater. So this is new. I mean, we saw that at the summit. Also, again, were the leaders of South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And so the United States does appear to be driving a push for NATO to focus more on security in East Asia.
So, Sean, China has warned NATO against a provoking confrontation by claiming it was an enabler of the Ukraine war. Is a new type of Cold War brewing?
I don't think it's brewing. I think it's already brewed. I mean, China is taking significant actions in the South China Sea. China is taking actions in Africa. It's building up its military capacity. It's building up military bases around the world. It has been for some years now, stepping up to challenge United States global supremacy, NATO supremacy in its sphere of influence as well. And it will continue down this path unless NATO and the Americas, and North America in particular, stand united against the expansion of China through its various initiatives, both military and economic. I don't see in the short to medium term any reconciliation between China and the West. I think we can only expect increased potential conflict for the foreseeable future.
So, Matthew, how well do you think the 75-year-old military alliance is adapting to the changing world order and ongoing conflicts?
Well, I think it adapted really well to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It didn't do well when Russia, of course, invaded in 2014. Whether NATO can adapt to what Sean was just talking about, the Chinese threat in Asia, it remains to be seen. It's way out of NATO's area. NATO has decided, since Russia's full scale of Ukraine, it really needs to focus on deterring Russia from attacking further into Europe. But for that core mission, NATO is the most successful political military alliance in history, and remains as such. And you show Kyriakos there, who's Prime Minister of Estonia, who's now going to be the foreign policy chief for the EU. So it's really important that the EU continues to strengthen its defensive capabilities and then collaborates and coordinates with NATO. But there are internal problems, of course, within NATO. We've had tectonic shifts in politics, a new British Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron. It's not clear if France is going to be functional. Olaf Scholz is clearly going to lose the election next year. And then who's going to be the president of the United States remains unclear. And if it's Donald Trump, he's made clearly he doesn't support a strengthened NATO. Yes. He said he'll end the war in Ukraine before he even enters office. So huge volatility in the political market of NATO.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.